Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WellMed Charitable Foundation's Caregiver Teleconnection. We have a speaker today from the ALS Association. Sorry, I keep saying Alzheimer's, who is going to talk to us about the disease, about the association, and about the tips for caregivers. So, Laurie, would you please go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, and then start your presentation.
Absolutely. So good morning or good afternoon if you happen to be on the East Coast. Thank you so much for having me. Anytime we have the opportunity to talk about ALS, to bring awareness, and then of course to let anyone impacted by ALS know about resources available, we really jump at the opportunity. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, I am a Northeastern girl. I grew up in Vermont. I now live in Maine. We moved here about 24 years ago just because we loved the ocean, raised two kids who are now grown. And my professional life really was mostly have a background in psychology, so did an awful lot of human services related positions, both in nursing care as well as community care. I joined the ALS Association a little over 6 years ago, and I was the primary care services support person, care services manager for folks in Maine living with ALS. So that means I got to travel this beautiful state. I got to visit people in their home and got to know people both living with the disease, but the people who are providing their care as well. Because, some folks talk about, you might receive a diagnosis that is as scary as ALS is, but you don't get that alone. You have you're typically surrounded by loved ones who are also reeling from that diagnosis. So they really are the great educators. They have taught me a lot that I have continued to share and hopefully offer positive reassurance and education and support to people who are more newly diagnosed, who are needing what the folks have taught me as we've come along. More recently, my background does include a master's in medical education leadership. As I shared with Evelyn, that really just kind of came about because I was doing some teaching. I was teaching medical ethics and law at a local community college, and I just really loved teaching. And so that maybe I'll get better at it by furthering my career. So probably 8 years ago, I got my master's in medical education leadership. And honestly, this role now with the ALS Association as manager of education and competencies has really been a great mix of both my background and I'm caring for and caring with people impacted by illness, and then my love of education. So that's more than enough about me. So unless anybody has anything else they want to bring up, I can start with a presentation.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So again, this presentation will talk a bit about what ALS is and about what the ALS Association does. Most importantly, I want to hear from you folks as to what your questions are. If you would like for me to go into a little more detail when I've touched on something, please use the chat. And honestly, I have no problem with people asking questions as we go. I think it's going to be more interesting for you today. And I think it's going to be more interesting for people who will tune in later. So Evelyn, I am really comfortable with people asking questions as we go. Like any good educator, I am going to start with some objectives. So as I said, we're going to offer an understanding of what ALS is and how it impacts people, not just the person who has received the diagnosis, but the people around them. I'll provide an overview on ALS treatment. I want to share what we do at the association in what we have now coined as making ALS livable until it is cured, and to definitely explore support for those people who are in a caring role for people living with ALS. So let's start with the basics. What is ALS? Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis. Evelyn said, many of us know of it as Lou Gehrig's disease. What I have found with some of our younger generations, my kids wouldn't necessarily have known what ALS was, but they remember doing the ice bucket challenge now 10 years ago. And that phenomenon raised millions of dollars. Not everybody could tell you 10 years later why they did the ice bucket challenge, but it really did bring awareness to this condition like nothing else has. The little bit that I want for people to know about ALS without getting into any anatomy and physiology, ALS impacts motor neurons negatively. So it means that the messages from the brain to the spinal column, the motor neurons that are sending the messages, and from the spinal column to muscles are dying off. And so if messages are not being received either from the brain to the spinal column or from the spinal column to muscles, the muscles will no longer work. And so that is why we talk about it being progressive. The motor neurons don't just die overnight, but it's a progression of the loss of motor neuron activity. It is a terminal diagnosis, and currently there is no cure. But I want to say from the very get-go, that does not mean that there are not treatments that are helpful and supportive. So please know that we're going to get to that. Who is diagnosed with ALS? Well, first of all, ALS can happen to anyone, anywhere. Sadly, it impacts young people. We didn't always know that it would impact people in their late teens and their early 20s, but sadly, there is a small segment of folks who are impacted. ALS does tend to impact about 20% more men than women. But as we get older, that kind of balances out, and into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, men and women will get ALS at kind of equal percentages. As I said before, it happens, people can get ALS everywhere, so it's worldwide. Military veterans are twice as likely to get ALS. We have a lot of speculation about why that might be, but we don't have a conclusive answer as to why. Thankfully, the VA recognizes ALS as a military-related condition, and there are wonderful supports. But unfortunately, it is impacting more than a fair share of veterans. And the mean age, I said people can get ALS of all ages, but the mean age really is about 55. There's two different types of ALS in that they could look. I'll get into how it might look, but 90% of people living with ALS have a sporadic type of ALS. The other 10% have a familial type of ALS. So that just means in that 10% of familial type, there seems to be an inherited mutated gene. In the sporadic folks, even though they might have been found to have a mutated gene, there was no one in their family history to have had it before them. So it is sporadic, meaning it just kind of came out of nowhere. What do symptoms look like? Symptoms with ALS can start literally in almost any muscle in your body. And so some folks will recognize changes in their hands. Some folks might recognize changes in their breathing, some in their speech. So you can appreciate that ALS is very difficult to diagnose because it looks different at the beginning for everyone. Even if it's familial, if you had an aunt or a mom or, a dad who had ALS and you develop ALS and it's a familial type, it could still look very different because it impacts muscles, motor neurons to muscles, and those, we've got muscles all over our body. So we talked a little bit about it could start. ALS signs or symptoms can start any place except for the involuntary muscles. Bulbar onset just means it refers to the bulbar area of your body, your mouth, your tongue, your swallow. And then limb onset will start in your hands or your arms or your legs or your feet. I've met a number of people who will talk about they suddenly were having some falls. And, it's interesting how we're just so comfortable saying, oh, we're getting older and suddenly we're falling. Well, falls are not a usual sign of aging. And so with a little bit of investigation, you can look to see why are you falling. And so people with ALS might have what's called drop foot. Those muscles around the ankle are not as strong, or in the foot to keep your toes up. So those are some early signs of a good number of things. ALS happens to be one that can be impacted. So yes, ALS is difficult to diagnose. It really takes ruling out a many assortment of other things. There is no really clear way of diagnosing ALS without ruling out other things. In the Northeast, we have a lot of Lyme disease. And so when neurologists are looking and they're seeing these symptoms of some limb weakness, people are being tested for Lyme disease. Some folks with hand weakness and wrist weakness have been treated and maybe even had a surgery for carpal tunnel syndrome. So people are looking at all of these options, and we don't want it to be ALS. And so it really is kind of the condition or the diagnosis that's given when we've ruled everything else out. Sadly, that means it can take many months, and in some cases, several years to get that diagnosis. So let's talk a little bit about prognosis. I told you that it is not, that it is a terminal condition, but I want to talk about prognosis specifically. ALS is a treatable condition. And so depending on when someone is diagnosed, really when, and if we can get to a diagnosis sooner, prognosis is better. Because of course, with any condition, the best way to tackle it is to know what it is. When people have been concerned about a cancer diagnosis, well, once you know what a cancer once you know it's cancer and what kind, then there's all kinds of things to do about that specific cancer. Well, it's the same thing with motor neuron disease, and ALS specifically has treatments that are options for people. And of course, the goal is always to get people to live well longer. And there's a much better chance of doing that when we get to a diagnosis sooner. One of the things I didn't mention on the previous slide when I was talking about prognosis, there are some really interesting studies that discuss the, prognosis does tend to be better if you're a younger person, just like it would be for other really difficult diagnoses. Our bodies are stronger when we're younger. There is some science to say if you keep your nutrition up, Malnutrition means muscle wasting, and we're doing everything we can to preserve the muscles for folks with ALS. So good nutrition is really important. So when we look at prognosis, you're not going to get a clear answer if you're asking a neurologist, what does my prognosis look like? You can pull it up online, and almost everybody is saying 2 to 5 years is an expected prognosis. And yet, if you keep reading, you'll see that some folks have lost their battle before 2 years, and some people are living beyond 20 years.
Wow.
And so just, that's why that diagnosis is so important. And that's why looking at this screen right now that shows nutrition and wellness and family support and exercise is a little bit, that comes with a little bit of, it will need some clarification. Exercise that is not exhausting someone, that is not exerting, is going to be far better than exercise that is overexerting someone, can impact them negatively. So exercise in the right amount, working with a good team is the right answer. And then, of course, people who have some breathing involvement, if the muscles around your lungs weaken, if your diaphragm weakens and those intercostal muscles weaken, breathing is going to get harder, which means your oxygenation is going to get worse. So if someone has breathing involvement, getting them some good respiratory support, and what I'm talking about there really is there are good non-invasive respiratory treatments. So some people think about when your breathing gets bad and you might need to make a decision about ventilator use. What I'm suggesting is early on, it's been shown that if you're using non-invasive, so you think about people with sleep apnea wear that mask at night with their little machine. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about non-invasive respiratory support that will help people sleep better, get better rest, and then have more energy during the day. So these are the different kinds of treatments. When I talked about nutrition, a feeding tube does need to come into the conversation, because if someone is just doesn't have the endurance to keep their nutrition up on their own, it's best if they know what their options are. And these are all choices. Nobody at the ALS Association is going to suggest you should do this or you must do this. But most importantly, know what your choices are. There are people who have a feeding tube in and yet are still working full time and are doing things that improve their quality of life. So, but they've made those decisions, once they've come to know what their options are. So I feel strongly that people need to know there are treatments that add to extending and improving quality of life. One of the best things that someone diagnosed with ALS can do is to get affiliated with a multidisciplinary ALS clinic. And so if you, for those who can see the slide that I have to offer, the multidisciplinary clinic really puts the person living with ALS and the person caring for them right at the center of this model. And around them is a specialized team that understands ALS and specializes in some of the areas that must be assessed to get great care. So a knowledgeable neurologist, and I want folks to appreciate there are a number of different neurologists that specialize in separate things. So you might see a neurologist for a seizure disorder. You might see a neurologist for a cognitive disorder. The neurologists in ALS care are specialists in ALS. They understand and stay kind of up to date with how to best treat someone living with ALS. Our certified centers have an ALS Association liaison, someone with a social service background, or I should say a medical background of some sort. A nurse, a respiratory therapist is essential at a multidisciplinary clinic. We want to make sure we're catching any respiratory decline and offering support that can improve. A psychologist or a mental health specialist is really important. You know, both the person living with ALS and their loved ones, their caregivers, their spouses, their children, all will have emotional needs when they're living with an ALS diagnosis. So mental health professionals are important, as are a physical therapist, a speech therapist, a dietitian, and an occupational therapist. All have their own piece in helping to add to the quality of life for folks, and for so many, the length of life. There are a few medications that are available really to treat ALS in the way that we hope that it is slowing progression and ALS symptoms. So for instance, Nudexta is on our list, and that Nudexta is really used for some bulbar related symptoms. And so most of the treatments are related to lessening symptoms or maybe slowing the progression. There is one medication that I want to point out, Qalsody, and it's spelled kind of funny, Qalsody, is a newer medication that has been developed, and it shows incredible hope. It's a treatment for people with one specific gene that has been found in some people with ALS. Remember, I said, you know, their ALS comes in so many different packages. Qalsody is specifically for folks with an SOD1 gene. And it really is showing nice work with those folks and slowing down the progression. But also, there's been some sign that it is minimizing the effect of ALS. So it's still quite new to the market. There were a few years of studies. They continue to study it, but ultimately, our goal would be to have a Qalsody-like treatment for every type of ALS out there. So hope, there's much more hope on the horizon than there was even 2 years ago. Lots of equipment that could be helpful for folks living with ALS. I want to say just a couple of things about equipment. I've seen many families order equipment that they think might be helpful, go to some of our communities across the nation have wonderful loan closets. The ALS Association has loan closets for equipment that might be needed. But really the best thing to do about deciding on equipment is to work with that multidisciplinary care team, your clinic team, and try different things out. Our clinics have a lot of equipment right there where both the person living with ALS and their caregiver can see how things work and can give it a try. And we hear way too often how much money is being spent on ALS care. And we can't take all of that away, but if we can at least help people get the equipment they need, as opposed to just trying different things on their own, then we'll make it just a little bit better. And then I'm going to focus on what specifically the care services piece of the ALS Association looks like. So when I started today's conversation, I said my first few years with the ALS Association was traveling the state of Maine and supporting families impacted by ALS. And so this goes into just a bit of a list of those things that we could help as a care services staff person. We do help with care management. we really beg our providers, our neurologists, the community neurologists, community doctors, if someone is being suspected of ALS, make the referral to the ALS Association. So I'm going to say that again I know that there might be some kind of professional caregiver organizations listening to us. If someone is suspected of having ALS, it is never too early to make the referral to the ALS Association. And sometimes rather than saying ALS, a provider might say a motor neuron condition. Same thing. You don't have to know that it's ALS to make a referral. And by making that referral, these free resources will be available. So I'm gonna hesitate just for a minute. I can see Evelyn on the screen, so I see Evelyn looking. Is there anything in the chat or any raised hands?
Not yet.
Okay, perfect.
But you're doing a really good job. That's why.
And so just a reminder to folks, please feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat if you'd like me to elaborate on something that I've kind of, gone over quickly. So the ALS Association Care Services staff will also help you understand what your ALS centers and clinics available are, both locally and nationwide. For example, some folks we serve live in rural areas, and so it might be a 3 or a 5 or an 8-hour drive to an ALS certified center. So it might be helpful to know where are other clinics, because maybe you have a family member, that's closer by, or maybe there's one clinic that's doing an exceptional job of virtual clinics. Or sometimes people will think about reputation, and they know that the Mayos of the world or the Mass General centers are exceptional. And so if someone gets a diagnosis of ALS, let's make sure they get wherever they want to go to get that second opinion, because getting diagnosed early is important. But let's also try and alleviate some of the doubt or the what if by getting a second opinion. So we can help you know where your options are nationwide. We talked a little bit about the equipment and the National Equipment Program. Folks who are served by us are going to be eligible for free equipment trials, whenever we have that equipment available. So some things are very specialized, like power wheelchairs. We are going to help you get insurance coverage and kind of point you in that direction, because the right fitting power wheelchair, once someone needs it, is going to make a ton of difference on their posture, on their comfort, on their skin integrity. But Hoyer lifts, patient lifts, different kinds of lifts, if those become necessary, those are kind of run of the mill. And so to have those in our loan programs makes a lot of sense. And it will save families money. We have a remote language interpretation program so that we are reaching, everyone who's needing us, even if English is not their primary language. Plenty of informational materials. Our website, als.org, is a really great place to start looking for information. But if you want a little bit of help in identifying, well, what really should I be looking at now, and to what degree, certainly work with our care management staff. It can be, we've all been told, please don't do a Google search on things like ALS. It can be scary and overwhelming. So if you're not sure where to start and that als.org feels like too much, feel free to call it a care services person. And that's true for those of you in a professional caregiving role as well.
And you're going to give us that number, right?
Yes, at the end, I certainly will.
Okay, and you do have
So
a
I see
channel.
that Samantha has a question, so
Yes.
I'm gonna touch on that. Samantha asked if limb onset, so onset of ALS in your hands and your feet, your arms and your legs, is that more common? And I believe that it still is seen as a bit more common than bulbar onset. So yes, I would say yes, that's kind of the science right now. Great question, and I encourage people to keep asking your questions. As we continue to talk about care services that are available, I'm going to reiterate whether you're someone living with ALS, whether you're caring for someone with ALS because they're a loved one, or you're a professional caregiver or a work for an organization or association that's supporting caregivers, please know you can call the ALS Association and get information so that you can better help the people you're working with. So it is not just for families. I want to clarify that. Support groups are, most of you probably know people love them or they don't like them. But support groups are a place where you can meet with other people like yourself. And I said early on, the people living with ALS and the people caring for them are the best teachers at living with ALS. And so even if you have a fear of attending, talk with your local care services folks about, what do your groups look like and what are my options? I'm going to be perfectly honest. I've had lots of folks say to me, I'm afraid of seeing my future. I might be early in my ALS, and I am afraid that if I go to a group, whether it's virtual or in person, that I might see someone or some people living with more advanced ALS. And that really, I mean, that's a real possibility. And yet so many people who have gone and have been able to look beyond that have been able to accept the support from those folks who have been established in that group for a while. And so, most kind humans want to make your path easier than they had it. And I find support groups are very much that learn from what we've done, both the good and the bad, so that hopefully your path is easier. As I said, just in passing, we do have in-person groups and we have virtual groups, meaning people can join from any place and join like-minded folks, via Zoom, much like the business world is doing these days. And then those same groups and other programs are available for caregivers. And so I put it in red. I put caregiver programs in red because I wanted to make sure we spend adequate time on caregivers for your group. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we have, and yet at the same time, please be thinking about and prepare any questions you might have for me about what's available and what's not. So a lot of our care management programming is referrals and resources and getting things for people both living with ALS and for their caregivers. And so we try really hard not to duplicate what's already out there. So we pride ourselves on really great community partnerships. And so Evelyn was saying, let's make sure that people who are affiliated with the ALS Association also know about this podcast. That's what makes great sense. I know that some of the folks who might be tuning in at some point might work for some of the aging and disability resource centers. Same thing. Let's refer back and forth because you folks are doing some really great programs, are doing some some nice insurance support. I know that each of you, has a different take on things, but we don't want to duplicate things that are already being done very well. So what kind of caregiver programs might we have that would stand out specific to the association? We have specific ALS caregiver support groups. We have 2 nationwide virtual groups, actually. One is for men, one is for women. And they have, so male caregivers and then female caregivers. And they have become more and more popular. So those are breaking into subgroups, sometimes depending on topic, sometimes just depending on the number of folks who have registered. But the people who have been attending those have given feedback on it's just really wonderful to to discuss challenges, to laugh, to cry. You folks know caregivers really well, so you can appreciate that all of those things might happen in one sitting. But again, it's with people like-minded. One of the caregiver programs that I am really proud of and try to share with folks, whenever possible, is we have an ALS caregiver education course. And it's free and it's on our website. And that really was designed for paid caregivers because people were asking for it. And we had a family that said, if we fund this, will you build it? And so we did. And then we were so grateful to find out that even some people who have been diagnosed themselves with ALS have wanted to take the course. And some family caregivers, many family caregivers have now taken the course. And it's 11 modules, it's all online. And so some people have said, oh, it's so long. It is. And so just like I said, don't blindly go on to als.org and start looking for things, or go to Google and just start looking up ALS things. The caregiver education course has an intro to ALS at the beginning. That is the only part that you have to watch before starting any of the modules. And we designed it so that people would get an understanding of ALS. For example, some people have wanted to help their loved one exercise more to strengthen the muscles. And then the basic part of the intro to ALS reminds folks, this isn't a muscle disease, it's a motor neuron disease. And so where there's been loss, over-exercising could make it worse, not better. So we wanted people to understand really, what could be harmful and what doesn't work. So we ask that you take the course is set up and it's locked so that you must take the intro to ALS before you move into the other modules. But then the other modules, so the other 10, are all depending on what your needs are. So there's mobility, and there's nutrition, there's respiratory, there's some information on end of life options and extending life options. And so you can take those again at your own pace, because there is no need for, especially family caregivers, to sit down and try to make it through 11 modules when really what they need right now are the basics and what to do about those early symptoms that you might be seeing. So be sure to let me know if you have any questions about that. The ALS caregiver course is available again for free on our website. A couple of other really helpful things, both for people living with ALS and their caregivers, are we have a virtual home modification and safety assessment program. So we have trained professionals who will have you, usually a caregiver, walk through your home with a phone or a tablet and take a look at what some challenges might be in making your home accessible. And then you will get a very thorough report as to what some of your options are. And so that's both, quick options like let's just put in a raised, a commode over your toilet to make the seat higher with handles. Or it might be, gosh, let's look at, a bathroom renovation or different equipment. So we understand that not everybody's just going to go renovating their home. We want to help you identify pieces that will make accessibility better while you think about what changes might you need. I probably don't have to tell a caregiver group that caregivers come at all ages. So we have some nice youth support because we know that children are helping with ALS care. We have some great family support to support, parents who maybe are having to ask their kids to help out. And so we want to support all of you in some of those changes in the family dynamics. And we love partnering with different groups like Hope Loves Company that has ALS kid camps so that kids get that much needed respite, just like other caregivers. And then My ALS Journey is a newer tool of ours that it's an app, and folks diagnosed with ALS can put in as much or as little information in there as they want to try to identify resources and tools and articles that will help folks on their journey.
That's a lot of services.
It is, and so we're really careful about. I would never walk into somebody's home and say, do this and do this and do this. These are the things that are available, and what are you feeling right now that could be helpful? Or, through discussion, let the family or the caregivers talk about what they're going through so that maybe our care services staff can identify a few things. Well, it sounds like you're really struggling with this. I can share some options with you so that you know what's available. So we would never want to push everything at the same time. That's not going to help anybody. And then we've identified some specific caregiver needs. Again, this group probably knows them better than I do, but we have recognized at the ALS Association that we must make sure that our caregivers are getting lots of space and time in our services. And so some of the things that we've identified that you caregivers need is education. When it comes to a specific condition like ALS, you likely want to learn about it, but how you learn and at what pace really needs to be individualized. Emotional support, without a doubt, caregivers need that. Could be through support groups, but it might be counseling or peer support, one-on-one peer support. So we're not going to name those supports for you. We're going to let you know what's available. Physical support, caregivers, I hope you're letting your doctors know that you are in a caregiving role so that they can be mindful of that. They can be watching for some of those emotional and physical signs that you might need support around. Financial needs, often a condition like ALS. I know there are lots of them, but a condition like ALS will impact family finances. Help around the house. So we often talk about how to help caregivers. It's not even necessarily about helping with care, but it's helping with all the many things that used to get done around the house when everybody was well. And now that one person is not well, they're not able to do the things, whether their role was cooking or laundry or mowing the lawn or getting the kids to the sports things. So help in general. And then family concerns. Kids, we're always concerned about kids and grandkids and how do we let people in without them taking over, kind of thing. So caregivers, we're trying to give you more and more space in the conversation so that you're getting what you need as well. Support for professionals. Some folks may not be aware that we offer webinars and professional courses and conferences to professionals, because if you're a home care physical therapist, there is just no way for you to know about every condition that you could treat somebody with, because home care therapists, are dealing with many conditions, as are dietitians, as are social workers. And so we have a number of, again, free professional courses available on our website. We have one for all professionals in regard to how ALS impacts respiratory wellness. We built, and these are all built with content experts. We recently published or put out a course for ALS guidance for PTs and OTs. And I worked with PTs and OTs from across the country at some of our best clinics to build that course. So they're wonderful courses, they're free, and it's just to help folks understand what not just the patient, but the patient and the family might be needing when they're living with an ALS diagnosis. A couple of other pieces I just want to make people aware of. The ALS Association does a great deal around research. And so all of our funding is, people don't pay for our services. So funding is gotten through grants and through gifts and those kinds of things. And a significant portion goes to ALS research, because we can't make ALS livable until it's cured without research. And I don't know if I skipped it. Maybe I missed a slide. I just want to say the ALS Association does a great deal of advocacy as well. And what I mean by that, lots of you probably know, but we need to advocate for things that are needed for our communities, so that bills get changed, so that laws get changed, so that reimbursement gets changed, so that our communities are getting what they need. And so I'll just touch on a very specific bill that changed things significantly for folks in our community, the ALS community. Many of you probably know that if someone gets sick and applies for disability and then Medicare, so if you're younger than 65 and you've paid into the system, if you get a disability, if you're approved for disability, you could have a 2-year wait to access Medicare. Painful. I know that that's the case for so many people. Unfortunately, people who were diagnosed with ALS, so many were not living long enough to get their Medicare benefit. And so through significant advocacy, I mean, boots on the ground, people living with ALS going to their legislative teams and saying, this just can't happen. That has changed. For someone who goes in and gives the information around an ALS diagnosis, disability starts right away, and so does Medicare. So even at one point there was a 5-month wait. That has gone away. So I want to be clear. I don't mean that you can walk into your Social Security Administration office and hand them proof of your diagnosis and you're going to walk out with a Medicare card, but get the proper documentation to them, and it will be approved basically retroactive to that application. So that's advocacy at its best, and that's happening in many different ways. Right now, ALS clinics are not being well reimbursed, and so there's incredible advocacy. Some of our best neurologists across this country have gone to Washington to say, we want people, to live well and not cost us so much money. We have to give them, preventative or consistent care. So let's pay the clinic so they can care for folks and keep them out of the hospitals. So it all makes sense, but if we don't bring it to our legislators, they're not going to be thinking about our needs. They just can't. They've got a lot of people to look after. So I wanted to definitely touch on advocacy as well. And then, of course, spend just a couple of minutes saying, please know that we are always available to families impacted by ALS, people living with ALS, and to all you healthcare organizations who are doing the very best you can in helping people meet their needs. Our website is als.org, and the 800 number so that you can either leave a message or speak with someone directly is 1-800-782-4747. And by calling the 800 number, you are going to get a regional person, but they will likely be able to answer many of your questions and then let you know who from the ALS Association is right in your area and help you make that connection.
Wow. Laurie, this has been fabulous. I've learned so much, especially about Medicare. Woohoo! Good job. Good
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
I was wondering, on your website, do you have a map of your clinics, of your ALS clinics?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely, we do. And so you can put in, we've got a couple of search bars, one at the top and one at the bottom on the website. And you can just put in ALS clinic, ALS multidisciplinary care, and a map comes up. And each dot will actually give you the name of the clinic, who the neurologist is there, and a phone number to reach them.
How many clinics do you have?
That's a trick question. So
Sorry.
we have, because some of them are certified clinics, and I know even that number isn't, I better not even guess because it's getting up there. But then we have affiliated clinics, which mean certified clinics will have a research component as well as the full interdisciplinary team.
Wow.
And then we have, let's say 100 more where the research isn't there, but you can get that multidisciplinary team approach. So I'm not going to guess.
Okay.
If you were talking to one of our clinic reps, they of course could tell you, but I don't know.
Thank you for explaining that.
Mhm.
Folks, we have a couple minutes here. You want to ask some questions, something that was not clear, or something you've been wondering about, or suggestions you might have for people on, being a caregiver of someone with ALS. We would love to hear from you. Okay. Well, I have one
While
more
people are
question.
thinking, I will just reiterate the message that I was saying about hope and quality of life. I know that neurologists still just don't like to give this diagnosis. I know that some folks and family members even don't have enough information, and they'll just they'll say to the person newly diagnosed, "Oh, I'm so sorry." We are sorry that this exists, but I want people to realize that with support and training, quality of life can be and should be much better than we knew it to be, even 5 and 10 years ago. So to please be hopeful and know that our ALS community is vibrant. I was telling Evelyn at the beginning that a couple of weeks ago we were in Texas for ALS Nexus, and we had some international folks. We had lots of local meaning here in the US, clinicians and researchers and students, but even more important, we had, I think we had close to 200 folks living with ALS and their caregivers in person, because they had to get themselves there, but they could attend for free. And then we had 1,600 folks attend virtually, mostly people living with ALS and caregivers. And some of the comments after ALS Nexus from people living with ALS were how hopeful they felt after seeing advocacy, researchers, and care services come together for 2.5 days saying, this is what we're doing. If we collaborate, we will be that much better. Let's keep moving forward.
Fabulous. I have one other question since I don't see any from our participants.
Okay.
But like, again, I think it's because you did such a thorough job. I've certainly learned a lot. And that is, I understand that there is gene testing. If you had ALS in the family and you want to know if you should have kids, or you want to know, if you will have it in the future. Is that true?
Yes. So genetic testing is very important in kind of solving this, what is ALS and what's happening with our genes. The most important part of genetic testing, however, is genetic counseling. What I would want anyone to know is, if you have a loved one with ALS and you're concerned about whether you might have a gene that predisposes you to ALS, then speak to a genetic counselor before getting the testing done. For a good number of reasons. Finding out that you carry a gene that could predispose you could impact you emotionally, even if you have no symptoms, even if you may never develop ALS. To know that you have that potential will impact who you are. So get some help in sorting out what's the pros and the cons. The other thing, and back to advocacy, even though we're advocating to do away with this, being a known gene carrier for ALS can impact life insurance options. So not health insurance. We're protected. Our health insurance is protected. But life insurance, right now, if there's a test that shows that you have that you're an SOD1 carrier, and that's just because I can think of that gene off the top of my head. There are many others. It could impact your ability to get life insurance or your life insurance costs. So please don't just randomly, because some places will do genetic testing for free, don't just do it without giving real thought. And a genetic counselor will help you think about what you should think about before getting it. For someone already diagnosed with ALS, genetic counseling and testing are incredibly beneficial, and there's very little negative if you are already known to have ALS. But for people who maybe are looking at familial, there is a negative, there could be a negative impact.
Wow, that was amazing. And I'm so happy that you explained that. I just want to thank you so much. We don't have much time left. Usually I try to tell people the upcoming sessions for the month, but we have, let's see, 5 more than this one. And across the board, they're just all by professionals, all by experts in their profession, like Laurie. And we hope that you will join us. We hope that you will go on to www.caregiverteleconnection.org and look at the list of podcasts that we have put together over the last, I don't know, 3 years, maybe 4 years, because it's a very large set. It's amazing what you can find there for any kind of caregiver, for any kind of especially dementia diseases. So please take advantage of that. And Laurie, you did an absolutely beautiful job. Participants, thank you so much for sticking with this. This was a lot of information, but tremendously informative and helpful. And I want to also thank the WellMed Charitable Foundation for all that they do to help caregivers around the country. Also, if you're not registered, I want to give you the number to get registered, because you won't get the resource, you won't get the slides. And that number is 866-390-6491. It's 866-390-6491. And the reason you want to do that, this is kind of an infomercial, is because you'll get the monthly calendar too. So please join us for the upcoming events, upcoming Zoom meetings, make a phone call. We thank you so much for participating. And Laurie, what a fabulous job. And I am
Thank
going
you
to
for
stop.
having me.
Yes, I'm going to stop the recording at this point. And thank you all. And thank you for what you do.